What? What money? I don't understand. Could Josh be hiding something from me? Oh, it seems like we're in big trouble. But wait, let's start at the beginning. My name is Vanessa, and I finally graduated from high school a couple months ago. The final exams were so hard. So, my friends and I decided we'd take a break for a year before going to college. In the meantime, we rested, partied, and dreamed of traveling. Well, actually, I was the only one dreaming about it. The thing was, I had never had much money. I was raised by a single mother, and she had to work really hard to provide for us. My best friend, Tracy, had it so much easier. We'd met in kindergarten, during the happy time in my life where I still had no idea what money was. Then, Tracy and I went to school together, and that's when I started noticing how different we were. While I was wearing the same old jeans for years, my friend was always in brand name clothes, coming to school in new outfits every single day. She had the most beautiful school supplies, a personal driver, beautiful countries for holidays. Envy could have destroyed our friendship, but I tried not to give in to it. So we stayed friends, and I loved her with all of my heart. So while I was stuck dreaming of traveling, Tracy was living those dreams out, to the point that I saw my friend more often on her Instagram story than in real life. One of her trips became the reason my life got turned upside down. One day, I was scrolling through Instagram, as usual, looking at the photos of my friend who was on a tropical island this time. I was feeling both envious and miserable. But after a couple hours, things got even worse. My boyfriend Josh and I went on a date, and the difference between my life and that of my friend suddenly became especially apparent to me. While Tracy was swimming in an azure sea, I was eating cold potatoes at McDonald's and getting blisters walking around the city park for hours. Josh and I had been dating for a few years, so he immediately noticed that I was in a bad mood. He asked me what was wrong, and at first, I didn't want to say anything, but I couldn't help myself. I told him about everything that was bothering me. The longer that we talked, the more upset Josh looked, but I just couldn't stop myself. We ended up spending the rest of the walk in complete silence. When I woke up the next morning, I felt so ashamed of how I'd acted. I texted Josh, but he didn't answer me. Then I went to his house, but his parents said that he'd left early in the morning and he hadn't been back since. And I felt so worried throughout the whole day. Josh wasn't responding to any of my messages. Although, late in the evening, he finally called me and said he wanted to meet. And you will never guess what he was holding in his hands. Tickets to the very island Tracy had gone on vacation to. I was over the moon. I immediately threw my arms around his neck. This was absolutely the best gift I had ever received. It wasn't until a couple days later that I realized, while sitting on the plane, Josh didn't have that kind of money. Where had the tickets come from? I wanted to ask, but the view outside my window made me forget about it. Bright azure sea and a green island with snow-white beaches. My dream had finally come true. We stayed in a nice hotel, and of course, we went to see Tracy. My friend hadn't been expecting to see us, but she seemed genuinely happy. We spent the day swimming and sunbathing, and in the evening, Josh said he had a surprise for me. He blindfolded me and led me somewhere. I felt so curious as to what he could have come up with, but I never imagined what I was going to see. Josh had arranged a date on the beach for us. A table and chairs were standing on the sand. We sat down to have a dinner of tropical fruits, and we watched the sunset together. It was the best night of my life, but the fun didn't end there. I took a bunch of photos and posted them all on Instagram. I was beaming with joy because I got literally flooded with likes and sweet comments. Josh didn't take his eyes off me that night. And not even 2 days had passed when I was in for yet another surprise. Another date, but this time underwater. They put special capsules on our heads so that we could breathe. Eating with them on was impossible, of course. But Josh and I had no time to eat anyway because there were tropical fish of all colors swimming around us. Once again, I felt like I was in a fairy tale. And, again, the photos I posted on Instagram caused quite a stir in the comments. This time, though, Josh was acting kinda weird. He kept checking my profile, reading the comments, and looking at how many likes I was getting. He also kept asking, "You really liked that, didn't you?" The next day, he caught me off guard with another date. This time, Josh led me to a cliff where people were bungee jumping. I crept cautiously to the edge and saw sharp rocks in a river far, far below. The latter looked more like a thin stream from this kind of distance. Oh no. No way in hell am I jumping from here. I immediately protested, but Josh didn't listen. He tried to persuade me and said, no, you'll really like it. And he told me the photos would look really cool and I would definitely regret it if I didn't even try. And long story short, I agreed. And, I didn't like it. Falling so far was incredibly scary. So scary that I ended up crying. Josh had been right about one thing, though. The photos were really cool. None of my photos had ever gotten that many likes, but I was so tired and overwhelmed that at that point I had no strength to actually feel happy anymore. The next morning, I snuck out of the hotel to meet Tracy. We had agreed to have breakfast together and then relax on the beach, but somehow Josh found me. When he told me that he had a surprise for me, again, I wasn't exactly happy. What now? I thought, and I even said I wasn't going anywhere. But Josh acted like he hadn't heard me. He coaxed at me, he insisted, and in the end he practically forced me to get in the car. As we were driving away, I looked sadly at my friend, who was left all alone in the cafe. It seemed like she was really upset with me. I felt sad, but I didn't know that things would only get worse from here. Josh brought me to an open airfield for a parachute jump. I couldn't believe my eyes. Just the day before, I'd been crying because I'd been afraid of jumping off a cliff. And now he wanted me to jump out of a plane. That was not going to happen. I got out of the car, but he kept trying to convince me to do it. Only this time, I didn't agree. Instead, I told my boyfriend everything I'd been thinking of his behavior over the past few days. I waved my arms, stomped my feet, and I screamed that he was insane. It feels like instead of spending time with me, you're in some kind of race. I yelled at him. It seemed Josh really hadn't been expecting that kind of reaction from me. He looked confused. And without waiting for me to come up with something to say, I hailed a taxi and I drove back to Tracy. Sitting in the car, I broke down and I burst into tears. I felt terrible. On the one hand, I felt guilty because of the way I had treated Josh. But on the other hand, he had gone too far. I shouldn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. Going back to the hotel in the evening was kind of scary. I was afraid Josh and I would start fighting again, but nothing like that happened. As soon as I came into the room, he started apologizing. He said he'd been in the wrong, and then he pointed at numerous boxes scattering the bed. Oh, I hardly knew where to look first. Dresses, skirts, jeans, even jewelry from the very best brands that I'd only ever seen Tracy wearing. There were even handbags there. All of the things that I'd been dreaming about for so long. So, of course, I couldn't stay mad at Josh any longer. We made up, and we spent the rest of our vacation days relaxing, without any crazy dates. It turned out that that was exactly what I'd been missing, and I really didn't want to go home. I was starting to wonder again where Josh had gotten all that money from, and I don't know why, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Oh, how I wish I had been wrong. When we came back home, at first, everything was great. It seemed like our friends saw us in a new light. Everyone was interested in our vacation. And Tracy was still angry at me, but I hoped that she would soon understand. But then Josh started acting weird. He would often disappear into himself or withdraw. I could see that something was majorly bothering him. Weeks passed, and I started noticing that he'd lost weight and was starting to look really pale. I had to spend several days trying to convince him to simply go for a walk with me. We had returned to our old life after a luxurious vacation, so we had to go to an ordinary cafe for our date. But, The emotions I'd experienced had been quite enough for me, so that didn't really bother me at all. We had a good time and strolled through the park until late at night. And when we went home, I was in for a surprise. Unfortunately, this time it was another kind of surprise. We were walking down a dark alley when some strange thugs blocked our way. I was startled and clutched Josh's arm, but I noticed that he looked really calm. I even thought maybe he knew these people. I was right. Those guys started demanding money from my boyfriend, saying that they were tired of waiting. One of them even said, "If you don't give us the money back, we..." But I didn't get to hear the end of the sentence. Josh suddenly pulled me by the arm and we started running really fast. We ran and we had to cross several blocks before those scary guys had finally fallen behind. And after that, Josh couldn't keep quiet anymore and he told me everything. That night, when I had complained about being envious of my friend, he'd felt ashamed of being unable to give me everything that I wanted. Josh loved me so much, and he wanted to make me so happy that he'd resorted to desperate measures and he'd withdrawn the money he'd been saving for a motorcycle since high school from the bank. That had been enough for the tickets and the hotel, but Josh hadn't known how happy his dates would make me. Eventually, he started loving the taste of it. At first, to make me even happier, he'd spent the money he'd been saving for college. Then, to buy me stuff and apologize, he had gone into debt. For the past few weeks, he'd been harassed by people demanding he pay back on the loan. But Josh didn't have money like that left, and didn't know what he was gonna do. Only now do I realize how blind I was. I should have asked where he'd gotten such a large amount of money right from the beginning. I love Josh so much, and I'm so happy he wanted to please me like that, but doing things like that was just too much. Please tell me, what am I gonna do? After my boyfriend has already done something like this for me, I can't leave him alone to deal with this. I absolutely have to help him, but I have no idea how.